Recording in progress.
All right, so 9 plus some change a little bit. Good morning again to those of you who are maybe new walking to the room. Welcome to the June 12th meeting of the Board of Investments. Oops, mic's on. Welcome to the June 12th meeting of the Board of Investments. Let's go ahead and take the roll.
Oh, let's do pledge of allegiance.
Oh, sorry, you can do the pledge of allegiance first? Okay, all right, so let me call on Ted Granger, our CFO, to our pledge of allegiance. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'll start with roll. Thank you, Mr. Jones. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual and in-person meeting, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Ms. Ginsburg? Ms. Mee?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Green? Mr. Rue? Ms. Martin? Mr. Gatto? Mr. Fay? Thank you. And Chair Jones?
Present.
Thank you. Staff participating in the meeting include the following: CEO Santos Kryman, Deputy CIO Jude Perez, Chief Counsel Stephen Rice, Deputy CEO Louis Lugo, AEOs JJ Popovich and Laura Guglielmo, CFO Ted Granger. Investment staff include Esmeralda Del Bos, Bache Masaragian, James Rice, Kwok Win, Jason Cho, and Amit Agarwal. Consultants present today are the Makita Investment Group, Stepstone Group, and Alborn. We also have the Milliman team here. We have Craig Glide, Nick Collier, and Jana Jennings. Trustees, please use your raise hand option to be placed in this queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mic until you're ready to speak, and now we'll proceed with the agenda.
All right, since we are temporarily short of a quorum heading into the approval of minutes, we will postpone that.
No, we don't have anybody participating under AB 2449 today.
Right, so then under approval of minutes, then we need to
We're gonna hold off, yeah.
Okay, right, that's what I meant. What, did I say something different? Oh, sorry. As my daughter always reminds me, I say something different than I think I was saying, but I think that's just her trick.
And mine.
Okay, so then public comment. Do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
Public comment. And then so right into the executive update. Jude.
Oh, Louis, you wanna go first? Or?
CIO report? Yeah, CIO report, yeah.
So good morning. Good morning, Chair Jones and trustees. As you can see, Mr. Grable is not here today, so I'll be coming in as a relief pitcher. The goal is to be a high leverage guy at the end of the game and not a mid reliever when the game's out of hand. So I want to thank Melissa for driving slides today. So Melissa, I know you're in the office, so thank you very much. And turning to the CIO report, if we can go to slide 4. So this slide shows a variety of market indices across multiple asset classes and the various performance over various time periods. So on the left-hand side, you can see that shows that there's equity, private equity, fixed income, and it shows the subcategories in different indices. So this gives the board a good understanding of what's happening across broad asset classes and how markets perform. The one thing I do want to point out on this is that this is as of May 31st, 2024. So when I get into talk about the fund performance, that's for April. So this is a month ahead. Okay. One thing I do want to point out up is at the top left, is you can see that the MSCI ACWI, that is our main benchmark for our growth functional category. You can see for the 1 month that it was up 4.1%. So if Mr. Grable is here, he would say that was an excellent year. And you can see for fiscal year to date, it's up 16.2%. So next month when Mr. Grable's up here talking about the fund's performance, you can get a good idea that May will be a positive month for the fund. Looking to the top right of the chart, that's our U.S. aggregate, Bloomberg U.S. aggregate bond index. That's the main benchmark for our risk mitigation category. That was also up 1.7%. So when you have both equities and bond markets up, you know that it was a successful month and mostly due because of growth on earnings periods. And then in May, there was a little bit of anticipation that interest rates might get cut. Yeah. So one thing I do want to point out on this slide is on the bottom chart, there's a thing called the reference portfolio. I did have a question posed to me via email this week, so I want to talk a little bit about the reference portfolio. This is simply taking the top two boxes, the MSCI ACWI and the Bloomberg, and creating a 60-40 portfolio, so 60% equities, 40% bonds, and putting them together. The reason we show this is the easiest portfolio you can make. I can go into Fidelity, Vanguard, whatever it be, and I can build this with ETFs. It's cheap, doesn't cost much. And so the reason we like to show it is the goal is over the long term, the pension plan should be able to beat a 60-40 portfolio for all the complexities that we have. We have a large staff, a very good team investing in private. So that's the reason we show the reference portfolio on this slide. So if we can move to slide 9. So this is the total fund summary. What I do want to point out here is this is our actual performance ending April. So this is a month lagged than the numbers I just talked about. So you can see on the top left, for April was a more volatile month and the markets were down and we were down 1.4% altogether. So if you go back from November all the way to March, Mr. Grable's been able to sit up here and talk about high water marks and positive performance. And I get the luck of him going on vacation and having to report a month down 1.4%. So bottom left, total fund value, we finished the month of April at 76.9 billion. And then we also, in the bottom middle, we had 1.2 billion in cash. And then of course, the asset allocation donut on the far right of the slide is still our current asset allocation. This will be updated as July 1st as we get into the new allocation. So now looking at the top middle, this is the upside down capture ratio. So I wanted to explain this a little bit as I did, like as mentioned, I did get posed a question. So with the 70, this is taking our fund performance and then comparing it to the reference portfolio. So what that 75 is telling us is when that reference portfolio up is $1, we are only up 75 cents. So we're not capturing all the upside of that reference portfolio. The good news is though, on the right side where you see the 57, when a reference portfolio loses $1, we only lose 57 cents. So this is showing us that the board's asset allocation is being successful as we are protecting on the downside. So anytime you get those two, 75, 57, and come up with a ratio that's more than 1, that means we're doing successful and our asset allocation is working. And with that, we can move to slide 10. So slide 10 shows a more detailed view of the fund's performance as well as OPEBs. This breaks out the asset categories. And the one thing I do want to show here is this also shows the benchmark. So for the 1 month period where you can see we were down 1.4%, you can see that we also beat our benchmark by 1.6, which was about 1.6%. Looking at the fiscal year to date numbers, you can see that the fund is up 6%, but trailing our benchmark. So we've had good absolute return, but still trailing the benchmark, which is at 7%. But we are ahead of our 7% hurdle, and knowing that May will be up, and then as halfway through June, hopefully the markets continue and that we do meet and beat our actuarial number. Looking down at OPEB, you can see that OPEB, and that's getting small for me, was down 2.8%. And a little bit behind its benchmark. And for the fiscal year, it's up 6.4%. And the difference between OPEB and LACERA, just to Mrs. Mee's comments in the committee that we just had, OPEB is mostly implemented passive as we build out the private programs. So it does have more volatility than the pension. But you'll see as time goes on over the years, these two plans should be converging as we implement those. And so then the last thing I do want to cover is on slide 14. In the top right, this graphic here shows our exposure by AUM. In the top right, there's a box there that's called ROW, that's rest of world. Last month we had a question, what's in that rest of world? So Melissa, I'm gonna have you go through 2 slides real quick, but if we can go to slide 25. This is the rest of the world at 5% broken out graphically. So we have it broken out by emerging markets, developed markets, and frontier markets. You can see at the bottom of the box, as I've gotten older, I can't see that well, so they're getting very small. So what we did on the next slide, if you go one more to slide 26, we did break it out so that you can see the numbers. And we're just doing it for this month as we had a question, so we just wanted to show the board what was included in that. So knowing that we have a packed agenda and I'm filling in here, I'm going to keep my comments brief, but happy to answer any questions on the CIO report.
I just wanted to say, as I was looking through this, I was very happy to see it. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for addressing all my comments.
Super, thank you very much. Any other questions? I know, David, you came in on the fly. Welcome. There you go. So with there being no other questions, and then let's go on to our member spotlight, JJ.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, trustees. So please join me in taking a moment to recognize and celebrate the member selected for this month's Member Spotlight. Our Spotlight program is a time when we take a moment to recognize the hardworking members who serve the constituents of LA County and celebrate their contributions to our community and provide us a moment to reflect on why we do what we do. And so with that, this month's Spotlight is Georgia Langdon, who has served a phenomenal 58 years in public service for the County of Los Angeles. She started in 1966 as a clerk, and she comes from a family of folks that serve the county as well. Her parents were LA County employees. Her son is currently a sergeant with the LA County Sheriff's Department, and she's also fortunate enough to have 6 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren, which I'm guessing one day will also be county employees based on her family's service. But a phenomenal career. She's also a very involved charitable volunteer. So as you can see, she participates in United Way, Shriners, St. Jude, and various homeless programs. So what a life of public service, and so we thank her for everything that she's done. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, moving right along then Louis, then with the CEO report, please.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Chair Jones. Good morning, trustees. I'll highlight a few items from our CEO report. First, again, we concluded our Board of Retirement offsite a couple of weeks ago, and we appreciate the attendance of the BOI trustees. I thought your engagement and attendance was very much appreciated, and it really goes to our mantra of One LACERA being really collaborative. So again, I think it gives a well-rounded view of not only the scope of the BOI, but organizationally what we do in terms of delivering service. So appreciate the attendance at the BOR offsite. We continue to make progress in terms of our hiring. We sit at 21%, which is a slight decrease of 22% last month. Our goal by the end of the year is to get to 15% vacancy rate. Our hiring, our human resource staff, as well as our divisional managers, continue to make progress in terms of examinations and interviews. So certainly appreciate the efforts of everyone to get to a manageable vacancy rate. Board elections, a couple of updates with respect to the Board of Elections for both the Board of Investment and the Board of Retirement. Third member elections, as we stated the last few months, we'll continue to commit to the boards in terms of updating on milestones. Trustees for these 2 elections will assume office January 1st of 2025, and it's a 3-year term ending December 31st of 27. Former trustee Herman Santos, he vacated his seat, so that 3rd member election, once it's certified by the Board of Supervisors, which we hope they declare it by October 22nd, that individual will then assume office and remain, fill that seat for the remainder of the year and then start their 3-year term. We are working collaboratively, and I want to thank JJ Popowich on this. We're working collaboratively with the executive office and the county's executive office, which really handles the election for us, and making sure that we're communicating now to eligible employees that would look to be nominated. The nomination period right now sits from May 22nd through June 21st. After that nomination period, then we have elections which start July 2nd and run through August 30th. And as I stated, then October 22nd, we hope that the Board of Supervisors will then declare the election for both the BOI and BOR 3rd member election. And then lastly, just want to give a shout out and a highlight to our employee council team. It's highlighted in the CEO report. They're a staff-led volunteer team, really made up of individuals that look at team building, look at networking, as well as, really improving morale throughout the organization. And they had a March of Dimes event last month that was successful. Several LACERA staff members and their families attended and raised money for that in collaboration with LA County Department of Human Resources. And also there's a Dodger night scheduled for June 22nd, where about 80 staff members are going to get together and attend Dodger go to Dodger Stadium and attend I think Dodgers versus Angels game.
I believe so.
So again, appreciate that group in terms of elevating kind of team building, team unity among the organization. And Alex Ochoa serves as chair for that, our employee council team. So with that, that concludes my update, and certainly stand for any questions.
Trustee Me?
I just want to make a comment, say that great job on the postcard, the election postcard to general members. I know that's new compared to last year's election. Last year's election, the general members turnout was really low in comparison with retiree voting. So this effort is really great, great job. I think we are doing members a service when we communicate with them effectively on matters, things that matter, like this election. So thank you for your work.
Great. So like JJ Popworth's in a
Of
communications
course, to the team, yeah.
Yep,
Communications.
absolutely.
Yep.
All right, any other questions? Welcome, Trustee Green. While we have you here, let's go ahead and approve the minutes.
We can, because Mr.
Oh,
Bruce
he
stepped
just-
out.
Okay, all right. So we'll come back to that one. You'll also be present for the consent items as well.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and get set up for the proposed amendments to the conflict of interest
So,
code.
since it's consent, you can pull the item if it's for discussion. If not, we can approve them together.
Well, we still need the votes.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why I was trying to.
Oh, we can start. We can go back to minutes.
No worries. It's the summer.
Sorry.
Okay, so let's go ahead and, with respect to last month's minutes, are there any changes, any noted changes at all by members of the board? There being none, can I have a motion to approve? Second.
Okay, Ms. Me,
Aye.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Mr. Fay,
Aye.
Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Chair Jones.
Aye,
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
okay.
Consent.
So just, do we need, any questions at all about the proposed amendments and the consent items? If not, we just go to a motion to approve. Second.
Okay. Mr. Fay, okay, Ms. Me,
It was the proposed items, the conflict of interest code. Yeah,
No comment.
okay, yeah, but we're voting now on the motion.
Second.
Okay, oh, no, we just need you to aye.
Oh. Aye.
It's okay.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Mr. Fay, Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Mr. Jones.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
All right, subsequently, on the LACERA budget policy, the annual review, the recommendation as was submitted by Vivian Gray, Chair of the Joint Organizational Governance Committee. There being any questions or anything at all? If not, may I have a motion to approve?
So that was a consent items you approved together, but if you want to pull them, so
Do we need to do anything special for that under
No,
the,
it's-
because I know I already voted on it.
Yeah. this was already voted together, so the consent we're done,
Okay, good, so we're done. All right.
so non-consent.
Now we're into the juicy stuff. Okay, so the investment policy update, bring in the actuaries. No,
I'll take that one.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll try to make this as juicy as possible. So as you mentioned, the next recommendation is to approve the revised investment policy statement for the pension plan. So this is the final step in our asset allocation process. So in your packet today, you should have a cover memo from staff, a very short presentation, and then a red line of what was changed in the IPS, as well as a support memo from our consultant, Makita. So before I jump into the presentation, I just want to lay out that what this is doing, the IPS update, is taking the SAA that was approved in April, as well as the benchmark ranges and the implementation that was approved in May by the board, and then just capturing that in our most important policy document. And so when we made those changes, that kind of made us have to update the IPS so that it can stay current. So with that, Melissa, if we can turn to slide 3. So this is just a simple timeline that shows the steps we've taken over the last 11 months. All the items in blue and dark blue were educational items and discussions that took place with the board. And then the 2 action items are in green that I mentioned, the SAA and benchmark policy. So if we move to slide 4. So on the left graphic, this represents the infinity loop that outlines the board's delegated authority framework. And as you can see on the left-hand side, we've highlighted green, the investment policy statement is the number one thing that the board approves for delegated authority framework, and number two is the asset allocation. So if we move to slide 5, knowing that we have already approved the SAA and the benchmarks, this is just a table outlining of what was changed in the IPS. So on the left-hand side of the table, you can see what section, and in the middle, you can see what item changed and then the rationale. There was 2 very small changes in the body of the document to reflect the collapse of credit, so no longer liquid credit is a collapse to credit, and then in the real asset section, removed commodities as a standalone asset category. And then table 1 and table 2, which if we move to slide 6, this was updated. So this would be the non-red line version. In your red line, this is marked up and harder to read, so we put it here. So on the left-hand side is simply table 1 that shows the target allocation, the ranges, the policy ranges around those allocations, and then we're have an initial first step on July 1st of this year. And then on the right-hand side is table 2, that's just listing the benchmarks for each asset category that was approved in May. And then moving to the next slide, Muslim. That is all I have, short. I hope I made that interesting enough, but
No,
I'm still stand for any questions.
I know we're at the very end of this process, so any questions?
I do
Trustee
have
Mee.
one, very juicy, like you promised.
Yeah.
I know the delegate authority was approved last year, right? Now we're in the implementation, starting that new practice. I think the important things about successfully implement that is the reporting and monitoring. So I do want to take a look at the change in this investment policy statement before, after delegate authority, if that's okay to send me a copy, like the redlined changes. I assume this changes.
Okay, so to see a copy before?
Before
Okay.
and after the delegate authority on the investment policy statement, the redlined it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely.
good.
Just for trustees me, there wasn't much changes in the delegated authority as there was in one section. It was kind of already built in within the IPS where it states that the board can delegate if need be. So that was already built into the IPS, but I've been happy to do so. So
Yeah.
I move to approve.
Ms. Mee?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Fay? Aye. Mr. Rue?
yes.
Chair Jones?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
All right. And then,
No, I do. I just last closing comment. I want to thank the board. This was a very thorough, long process of 11 months. I think we did an excellent job. I think the board did well in choosing a great asset allocation. And then want to thank Tim and Makita for all their hard work. So won't see as much as me for 3 years. No, I'm kidding. But I'm glad we got through this process. I just want to thank the board.
great.
Oh, quick question.
Yeah.
So when is the next time we do this again?
So we do an asset allocation review every 3 years or at the board's request. So if something did happen in the markets or something, we can always come and look at this process.
All right, so Jude on the OPEB.
Yeah, so OPEB, I'm not gonna go through the same presentation. It's exactly the same. The only difference is if you turn to slide 5. Over the last couple of years, we've been converging the two plans to look closer together in implementation as well as governance and the IPS. The OPEB was lagging behind that in the new asset allocation that the board approved for OPEB included the overlays and hedges section. So this is the only difference between these two recommendations. So I don't want to repeat the presentation, but happy to stand for questions on OPEB.
All right, any questions for Jude? Motion? To approve? Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Mee?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Fay? Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Chair Jones?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
All right, super. And then I think on the next item, we, I think as usual and customary as we talk about these recommendations, let me ask the Makita team, which I know is a part of the consideration along with the Alborn team, just to step outside just for a moment while we have this discussion in open session, and then we'll bring them back in as necessary or at the conclusion. right, super. Welcome, Jason and Kwok to the table with Jim. Do we need to close the door at all? Do we need to go that far, or?
Yeah, that'll be a good idea.
I guess it is televised, right? So, yeah. From a, just trying to be considerate without necessarily being, okay, so, Jim, go ahead.
Actually, my colleagues are gonna.
Oh, they're gonna lead it, okay, gotcha, okay, go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Jones and trustees. Today, we are recommending that the board select Alborn as LACERA's hedge funds, credit, and real assets consultant. As a reminder, the board approved the minimum qualifications for the search in December. LACERA launched the RFP that same month. If we can flip to slide 3, please. Oh, sorry. All right, okay, I have control. Alborn is LACERA's current hedge funds, illiquid credit, and real assets consultant, and was selected by the board in 2019. Conducting a new search is consistent with good practice and our procurement policy, which requires LACERA to rebid for these services every 5 years. On this page, we include several merits for recommending Alborn, including their non-discretionary consulting model, which minimizes the potential for conflicts, the depth of their investment and operational due diligence teams, and the robust technology platform. We'll further expand on these merits throughout the discussion. And at this time, I'll hand it off to my colleague Jason, who will provide an overview of our search process.
Thank you, Kwok, and good morning, Chair and trustees. If the recommendation is approved, Alborn would provide consultant services on hedge funds, credit, and real assets, which together have a combined policy target allocation of 28% of the total fund, as of the recent strategic asset allocation approved by the board in April. The consultant will report to the Board of Investments and provide advice for the pension plan. Here we show the core responsibilities, which can be summarized in 3 parts. 1, providing the board with an independent assessment of staff's implementation of approved policies and guidelines. 2, conducting independent due diligence and providing concurrence memos for prospective investments. And 3, supporting LACERA's middle and back office functions. The evaluation team for the search consisted of 5 investment staff members, 3 of whom focus on hedge funds and credit, and 2 who focus on real assets. Additionally, I will note that Trustee Trevor Fay participated alongside the team in the interview rounds of the search process. This practice is consistent with prior LACERA consultant RFPs. After receiving firms' responses to the RFP, the evaluation team scored the proposals using the following criteria and respective weightings seen here. At a high level, the key categories were organization, technology, fees, professional staff, servicing capabilities, and mitigation of potential conflicts. Due to the more nuanced nature of assessing potential conflicts of interest highlighted on the bottom right, this criteria element was evaluated on a qualitative basis and then incorporated into the overall score. As a brief reminder, before evaluation, using the criteria on the last slide, respondents had to first meet the following minimum qualifications to be considered as candidates. And as Kwok mentioned, these items were approved by the board last December, and we confirmed that the 4 respondents did meet these minimum qualifications. Here we show the RFP timeline, which illustrates a 3-phase process that ultimately culminated in today's recommendation. The process began with the team assessing each written proposal, followed by a series of interviews with the respondents throughout the multiple stages. The evaluation team met routinely to deliberate and discuss our assessments at each phase. This executed timeline and today's recommendation aligns with the planned schedule that was initially proposed to the board back in December. Moving forward, on this slide, we offer a different overview of the process in terms of the candidate firms and the stages of the search. 12 firms were notified of the RFP, which was also posted on LACERA's website. 4 firms responded, shown on the upper left, and were subsequently interviewed. As the search progressed, Alborn and Mercer advanced for deeper diligence, and ultimately Alborn emerged as the group's final recommendation. Skipping forward a couple slides. Here we have the evaluated scores of the two finalist firms, Alborn and Mercer, using the previously mentioned criteria. As evidenced by being a finalist, Mercer was deemed capable of servicing the requirements of this mandate. However, Alborn was viewed more favorably across each scoring category. A few areas to highlight are the scores of mitigation of conflicts, servicing capabilities, and technology. For mitigation of potential conflicts, Alborn was scored an A because of the firm's business model, which only offers non-discretionary consulting services. This model minimizes certain potential conflicts of interest between the consultant and clients. In contrast, Mercer offers a combination of different discretionary and non-discretionary services and products. While this combination model may be common across the investment consultant industry, it lends itself to a higher degree of potential conflict when considering allocation of firm resources and access to investments with limited capacity. Within the category of servicing capabilities, Alborn scored higher than Mercer for a variety of reasons, some of which are having a more robust manager and market research portal, more risk analytics and portfolio optimizer tools, and greater depth in their operational due diligence team, also referred to as ODD. Specifically, Alborn has approximately 130 dedicated ODD analysts compared to Mercer's 45 dedicated ODD analysts. With regards to technology, Alborn's IT infrastructure is proprietary and built exclusively for client use. Much of their servicing capabilities just mentioned are all housed under a singular client portal. Comparatively, much of Mercer's technology was established using third-party platforms and requires clients to access different independent applications for research and portfolio monitoring. Moving on. Here we detail the fee proposals for both Alborn and Mercer. Alborn's negotiated annual fee proposal is $997,500, whereas Mercer's final fee proposal is $1,035,000 annually. Both firms provided a bundled discount for having hedge funds, credit, and real assets under one service contract. Through iterative discussions with Alborn, we negotiated a further discount of $225,500 per year beyond their initial proposal and bundled discount. On top of the improved pricing, the evaluation team also secured the inclusion of additional fund underwrites from Alborn. In comparison, Mercer would charge for any underwrites beyond an annual limit of 6. Mercer had the same opportunity to improve their fee proposal, but ultimately decided that their initial proposal was their best and final. I'll now hand it back to Kwok for the remaining presentation.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Here's where I'm prepared to provide additional merits of our recommendation, but also want to be respectful of time and happy to stand for questions now or continue on to the discussion.
You know, I think we all had a opportunity to look at this ahead of time. Were there any questions or anything specific related to the recommendation here? Trustee Me.
I just want to make a comment on the fee negotiation. Great job for saving LACERA dollars. Also, I want to have whatever fund that Trustee Fay have in the process. So next time, please consider it. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, anything else? Any other quick points of inquiry?
Oh, you go.
No, go ahead, you can respond. Yeah.
No, not numbers under that. You can be on anything you want to be. This was a great process. Like, it was really well done. Kwok, Jason, Jim, like, everyone did a great job. We had many discussions. Talk about deliberative. This was extremely deliberative. Like, I'm very happy with this outcome. So great job. I know that we have a great team here now. You get to see it in real life, and it's awesome. Good. Thank you. Just 2 quick questions. Alborn, how long have they been with us?
So the board selected Alborn in 2019 for approximately 5 years. And this aligns with our procurement process of going back to the market.
So this will be their first renewal?
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially, yes. And then for the
round two, phase two, was there scoring done for the four firms? Before you narrowed it down to two?
Yes, there was an initial round scoring the written proposals. And then after that, we interviewed all four firms and then assessed which ones we wanted to move forward with. And then we whittled it down to the two firms first.
If you could share that with us afterwards, and in future, if you could, I think in the previous RFP, you guys included those scores as well. So if you couldn't, I don't need to know now, but for future RFPs, just saying, it would be great to see those scores as well.
Okay, the initial, yep.
Yeah, for the initial four, and then, because I think it would, that part was for a different RFP presentation, you guys included that, and that was good to see.
Okay.
Because it showed the fluctuations. And then wait, so are we gonna vote on this, or are you guys gonna go over the DEI slide?
I'm happy to go over.
I mean, if you want to go over it,
Yeah,
I mean,
just-
otherwise I wasn't sure.
Just that one slide,
Sure.
just that one.
Okay, let me see if we can move forward.
I'm channeling
please.
our former
think,
chair,
let's see.
you know?
Slide 16 is the DEI slide. Melissa. Thank you. So this slide shows our assessment of Alborn's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Alborn's approach, similar to LACERA's, is broad across multiple pillars. Their DEI framework is integrated both internally at the firm and then externally via industry affiliation and via manager due diligence. And then the chart in the middle shows Alborn's demographic representation of its team at its senior levels across to the analyst level. Alborn continues to strive for greater representation of historically underrepresented groups and partners with organizations like TWIGO and 100 Women in Finance to recruit talent. And maybe I'll just pause here to see if there's any questions.
No, thank you. I just wanted to highlight, obviously there's still more room for improvement, but those numbers look pretty good compared to the industry. So just wanted to comment that and applaud Alborn on their efforts.
Thank you.
Voted. Being no other comments to there, motion to make the recommendation to approve.
Second.
All right.
Okay, Ms. Me,
Aye.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Mr. Fei, Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
We can invite both firms back into the room. Yeah. Thank you very much, Kwok, Jason. Thank you, Jen, of course. Let them back in or?
Yeah, Kaylee, can you open the door, please? Thank you.
Back. All right. We got Laura and our team here, just a moment. With the approval for the fiscal year 24-25 Administrative Retiree Healthcare Benefits Program and other post-employment benefits trust budgets. And the team, all right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Jones and trustees. Before you today is the 24-25 fiscal year administrative budgets for, as well as retiree healthcare and OPEB budgets. This item went to the JOG-C where there was extensive discussion and deliberation. So while we have a presentation, we would recommend that we stand for questions, and we're happy to address any questions trustees may have at this time.
Okay, from prep, there being none, motion? Oh, go ahead, Jason, yeah.
I unfortunately didn't get to view the JOG-C on the discussion on this, but really great report. You know, I'm glad to see, you know, I'm drawing a correlation between the vacancies and the overtime in the budget. And, you know, I want to draw attention to that, I mean, I'm glad, you know, nobody works for free, right? So if there's, you know, if there's work to be done, you know, people should be compensated. But, you know, that balance as far as budget, you know, looking at, let me find the page, it's the summary of the, It's salaries employment summary. I just was working off that.
I think you might be slide 37. Let me just double check.
All right, yeah, it's page,
In the budget or on the slide deck?
it's in the budget, the document said there's a overtime history of expenditures. I lost the page here. It's
think
page
it's on-
6 of 7.
Page 29 in the book, I think there's a summary.
And then there's the vacancy, which is, I believe, the next page. There it is, yeah. So page 6 and 7. First question comes to mind is the investment office with their expenditures of actual overtime being 0. Is that because they're not able to earn overtime?
The investment officers are non-represented, so yeah, they don't.
Oh, they're all
earn-
salary.
They're salaried.
Okay, gotcha.
They don't earn overtime traditionally, but we do have a process where if folks work over, the counties, we follow the similar standards that the county does. So when folks work over a certain amount of time, they can bank that time.
Gotcha, yeah. so-
But actually, your point, most of our overtime expenditure increase is really related to wage increases. We have certain times of the year, like our March Madness, where this Board of Investments focuses mostly on investments, but recall that most of our staff actually are supporting members face-to-face. And so during our March Madness period, which is not just in March, but really,
November, yeah, we had a
sort
couple
of
of
December through the end of March, we have tremendous need to serve members with spikes in retirement. So that's the biggest area where overtime increases, but certainly staffing shortages can cause overtime issues. We also use temporary staff throughout the organization to help offset our vacancy rates where it's, with the exception of investments, because it's just too specialized. And those costs are going down as we're filling these positions.
Yeah, I mean, you look, I mean, we're coming out of COVID with the understaffing that occurred in that 22, but there is a consistent pattern with, benefits and, member services, and overtime is necessary, but when you overlay the vacancy rate, there's a balance, and I'm more concerned not necessarily about the budget, but more of the human cost.
Absolutely,
Because
that burnout effect.
you get burnout and you're asking people to do more. Yes, they're compensated financially, but at what cost,
Your concern is shared among the executive team for sure. It's something we worry about. We would prefer to hire the right number of people to do the job, and overtime should be the exception, not the rule.
And I like what the office, a couple of meetings ago, we had a conversation with and I think JJ got it together, kind of that analysis of, succession planning with, using, data to support it, not knowing, but getting closer to the bullseye than just going, I wonder what's going to happen next year. So, but great report. I just wanted to make a comment on that. And again, my real focus is not necessarily the cost of financial cost of money, but the human cost. When you see, vacancy percentage rates, above 25%, that's meaning someone's not coming home late for dinner, frequently. So
Absolutely. I'm gonna just take a moment to praise our, it's really the whole department, all the staff involved in this, but specifically the Human Resources Division. We've had an amazing last quarter for hiring. June hires were just absolutely amazing. So we are on target for what we presented here in this budget in terms of tremendous number of hires in this last quarter. So we are very excited about that. Beginning, Mr. Lugo mentioned it in the CEO report that sort of starting the year off well. We actually are ending the year, hiring more people than we attrited. So we're very excited about that. That sounds simple, but attrition has been on the high end, and we've been seeing that decline, which has been great. Where hiring is increasing, and I'll tell you, our foot is on the gas button as hard as it can go right now. We have you will see additional hires in July. We've got a lot of people on the hopper. We've got exams and staff planned up. So not the huge numbers we saw in June in May and June because of our the big numbers being in our retiree benefits classes that we hire in groups, but lots of individual contributors that are going to make a big difference.
If I recall from Santos's conversation with us about the staffing things, we're still in the short term in kind of an overhire mode for some of those roles, knowing the attrition and kind of timing perspective around those, or not.
Right, in the retirement benefit specialist class, for sure, because we, in the past, we only hired for vacancies we had at the moment, but our training class is a year long, or almost 9 months, I think now. So you think about the attrition that happens over that period of time, you're always behind. And at the bottom line is, and we at a time when we saw retirements increasing, so demand was up, staffing was down. That was not good for customer service. So one of the main, part of our mission to produce, provide, and protect the promised benefit. I got that wrong. Produce, provide, and protect the promised benefits to our members. That customer service, that member service is every bit as important as driving the money to pay for those benefits. So we try to make sure that those are kind of equally balanced in how we run our operations. So making sure we have enough people at those front lines, answering those calls, meeting those members, addressing their needs. And then, behind the scenes, we do a lot to make sure that those folks, all the folks we have with the core services are being properly supported and can do their jobs efficiently and effectively.
And that beta analysis that you guys are working on, when it's close, would you be able to, I guess, put something for a future agenda, brief the board on it? Because I think it's really a great thing. I think it's encouraging, and it can give a look into the future if that's appropriate. I know it's getting developed right now, but would that be something we could maybe put on to talk with both boards about?
Sure, if that's the direction, sure. We'd be happy to.
Like in Mr. Grable's report, contributing to the workforce and unemployment down, and workforce percentages is going up. So, and we know that we got your back on this stuff. So
we appreciate that.
I move to approve it.
There being no other questions?
Well, make one correction. You said gas pedal. You mean the accelerator pedal, because we're going into the future with green.
Good point, absolutely.
We need a second? Second. Okay, Ms. Mee?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Fay? Aye. Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Chair Jones?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
All right.
Thank you so much.
So of my colleagues, were there any reports that needed to be pulled from your preview of the packet at all? You said you do have one? Okay. Trustee.
So in the staff travel report,
Yes. Staff travel report, okay.
what's that?
Item H.
So it's a quarterly report. I think I asked a question as I reviewed the monthly report for trustee travel and expense report in the past. So how come staff's report does not come with the expenditure report on monthly basis? And then if I recall correctly, I was told that expenditure for staff travel would be reported either in quarterly or annually. So I'm looking at quarterly report here. I don't see that expenditure report for staff travel, wondering why. And if it's appropriate to report it quarterly, so therefore the board's oversight.
Go ahead, Ted.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning, Chair Jones, trustees of the Board of Investments. Regarding staff travel, that is under the purview of the CEO. And what we've been doing is we've been reporting staff trips to the board as part of the record, and then we've been including the staff travel expenditures reports directly to the CEO. Again, he governs the staff travel.
I think it's important for the board to know, in my opinion, because this is part of oversight, in my opinion. It's important for us to know what kind of expenditure. It's also, I see it for us, trustee travel. It's important for us to know, so I'm glad that we have it there. I think similarly, I think it's important for the board to know for staff travel expense.
Yeah. Santos would like to provide a.
Yes, we'd be more than happy to provide it on a quarterly basis in terms of the, so we'll do that the next quarter, include a special report for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Any other questions? Or any reports to be pulled out? All right, there being none.
The quarterly performance report?
For, which one are you talking about here? The,
Right. Report C.
where did I miss? I don't know. Oh, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Or am I jumping the?
Dig down a little bit in the quarterly performance.
So the quarterly report, anything after C is FYI. A and B will be presentations today.
Okay, sorry about that. I was skipping over our actuaries' opportunity to do their thing today. Sorry about that. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Great. The Millman team. No doubt this will be juicy. So as always in this fair, we appreciate the great work that you guys do, detailed work that you guys do for us. All right.
Great. So good morning. Thank you for having us. With me today presenting is Nick Collier and Craig Glide from Milliman. They are LACERA's pension consulting actuaries, and they're here to present the actuarial risk assessment. This is our 5th risk assessment report. Although some of this information is included in the 2023 actual evaluation, staff feel that this information is important enough to prepare, have Milliman prepare a separate report and bring that back to the board, have a presentation, have a discussion on these actual concepts. The risk report really addresses things like measuring pension obligations, determining future contributions, and assessing impacts to the plan's funded status. I'll let Milliman get into a lot more detail on that. Also, Milliman will help us identify some controls to mitigate these risks. We're hoping this report accomplishes a couple of objectives today. Essentially, it provides some information to the trustees, some education. There's no pressure for making decisions today. This is a discussion piece. So hopefully that's helpful. And again, this is a tool. I know we just, the Board of Investments just reset the strategic asset allocation, but this information is really a tool for going forward and looking at that asset allocation again, and also when we're setting actuarial assumptions. The other thing I would mention too is there are some new trustees that weren't on the board when the 2023 valuation was presented to the board back in December. So this is our sort of mid-year touch point. And so this really gets the juices flowing in terms of actual concepts sort of at a midpoint in between the valuations. And finally, just very quickly, as I mentioned, the last valuation was the 23 valuation presented in December. This is our mid-year touch point. The next valuation will be the 24 valuation presented in December of this year. And finally, regarding the experience study, the last one was for 2022 on a 3-year cycle. The next one would be for 2025. So we'll bring that back to the board starting in the fall of 25. So just a quick update on dates. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nick and Craig to get started with the presentation.
All right. Well, welcome. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Dad. That's quite marching orders to get the actual juices flowing, but
Yeah.
we will do our best. Good morning, all. The risk assessment report focuses on the risk to LACERA's future funding levels and contribution rate.
Hold on, is your mic on? I want to make sure that for the purposes of our Zoom audience.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Thank you. I will restart that. Good morning. The risk assessment focuses on the risk to LACERA's future funding levels and contribution rates. Big picture, it's a lot. The story is very similar to what we've told you in the past years. If we could move to the next slide. We spent a lot of time with the board during the Triennial experience study, as Ted alluded to, talking about assumptions and trying to get the best possible prediction of the future. But there's one thing we can tell you for almost certain is we're not going to be right. The assumptions are not going to bear out exactly. So it's important to consider the potential impacts of these likely differences when making decisions. Just as an example, and this is, I mean, a pretty simple thing the board did a long time ago. As Craig is going to talk about, one of our main risks is on the investment side. So when setting contributions, LACERA smooths the investment returns over a 5-year period, so we don't get large year-to-year risks, or at least it mitigates the year-to-year risks due to the investment side. So as I'll talk about and Ted alluded to, the board has a lot of process in place to mitigate these risks, but they're still out there, so we're just going to give you a brief summary of that. So you have in your agenda item way down there, I think about page 500 and something, our formal report. We're just going to summarize that today. That formal report is based on guidance that we have from our actual standards of practice on how to identify and assess risks. So as I said, the risk assessment identifies and assesses risks that have a potential significant impact on the funding and contribution levels of the plan. It gives the trustees information to assist them in carrying out their fiduciary responsibility and helps them understand the risks of the plan. Next slide. And next slide. Obviously, there's been, over the last few years, been quite a bit of turnover on the Board of Investment. So we just wanted to go back and just, particularly on this slide, I think this is a good one, just kind of remember what LACERA, what the goal of LACERA is from an actual perspective, and talk about how that relates to the risks. So obviously, this is, I know a lot of you are going to be very, very familiar with this. I mean, the concept of funding a pension plan is we take the contributions, and for LACERA, that comes from both from the active employees and from the employers. Take those contributions, combine them with investment earnings, and that's obviously where you come in. You play a big role in the investment earnings, and we combine those two to create a pool of assets that is then used to efficiently pay out benefits. From a risk perspective, on the benefits, we can usually do year-to-year, actuaries can do a pretty good job of projecting what the benefits going to be paid are. Obviously, things aren't going to change. People aren't going to all of a sudden start living 10 years longer overnight. There's only going to be slow changes on the benefit side. But as you're probably very aware, investment earnings can change significantly year to year. A couple of years ago, we had 25% return, which a lot of funds were in that area. And then a lot of funds had significant negative returns in the following year. LACERA was more flat, but you're going to get some real ups and downs on the investment earnings. Where the actuary comes is when the investment earnings are up or down, then what's the balancing item? It's the contributions. So we need to adjust the contributions, and that is going to be the employer contributions, as the employee contributions are basically set in statute. So with the investment earnings, when they go up and down, we're going to need to adjust the contributions, and that's what we're going to, part of a lot of our focus today is kind of assessing how that potential impact. So just give you just a little more education. So actuaries, we're trying to get the assets to kind of be in balance with the benefits. But you think about the benefits, those are kind of unknown. I mean, we kind of know what the benefits being paid now are, but obviously going to be paid in the future. And we have a pool of assets, which is a pretty defined value where the benefits are not very defined. And that's where the actuary steps in. So if we can go to the next slide. Just the crux of what we do in the valuation process is take our assumptions and project those future benefits for the current population. You can see this graph shows future benefit payments starting at about $5 billion a year what's being paid out to the current retirees, shown by the blue. Current retirees are pretty easy to project because basically they go up due to COLAs, and then we also factor in life expectancy, and then we kind of project that payment out to the current members. Obviously, the active members are a lot more complicated because we have to estimate what their benefit is, when they're going to retire, and then apply the COLAs and mortality, project their future benefits. And we've also shown here in the light gray, that's future members joining the plan. When we do the valuation, we really focus on the current members, but the future members are accounted for, as you know, we call the normal cost, the value of benefits being earned. So when new members come in, contributions are made by them and by the employer on their payroll to effectively fund those benefits. But from a valuation perspective, when we talk about the actual accrued liability, the value of benefits being paid, that is just for current members. And if we move to the next slide, we can see how we do that. As I said, assets are kind of a known value as of a given date, whereas the benefit payments we're projecting based on assumptions off way into the future. How do we get those sort of on an apples to apples basis? We use the time value of money to convert those projected payments to a present value amount. And that conversion is what we call the discount rate, and that is the investment return assumption, which for LACERA is 7%. And if you take all those payments that we showed and discount them back, it's about $110 billion. In other words, if you had $110 billion right now, and all the assumptions went exactly as expected, you could exactly pay off that projection of benefit payments over the lifetime of the members. Converting that, as you can see, we have about 57 billion for actives and a little over 50 billion for retirees. Those are pretty similar. You'll notice if you look at the benefit payments, obviously the green is a much bigger piece, but because those payments are much more in the future, there's more of a discount. So really the two groups end up being roughly equivalent. So that's kind of the crux of what we're doing on the valuation. I'm going to turn it over to Craig to talk about the risk assessment. Next slide.
Trustee Mee, you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, I do have a quick question. So go back to slide, the projections. So the chart that shows approximately, I can see is 50 years. Is 50 years of future liability projection the typical practice in the industry?
Actually, we project out as long as we expect people to live, which is if you take a current member who's like 22 right now, there's definitely some chance they're going to live to be 100. So we're projecting out 80 years. We've just, for display purposes, we've just cut it off at 50 years. But those values reflect all future payments for current members.
Got it. One more question. So I learned from other actuary trainings that, if I remember correctly, I was told there's a regulation requirement that when we calculate the present value of future liability, right? I know that we're using the assumed rate, 7% discount rate. So is it a requirement that we should calculate, the present value using risk-free rate, to disclose?
There is a requirement to disclose that value if you used a risk-free rate. And we disclose that in the prior valuation. From a funding perspective, we don't think that's the best approach because it would end up getting huge contributions that would be required up front. And then if LACERA assumed a return close to that 7%, then we would have way overfunded up front, and then we would have effectively passed all the costs of these payments on to the current generation of taxpayers, where it should be more smoothly presented over there. So yes, there is that requirement just for disclosure, but what the actual practice in public sector work is pretty much everyone uses the expected return model, is trying to balance what our expected return is with our funding to try to keep our funding at a more level basis.
I understand in practice is, using the assumed rate is more practical. You don't want to freak everyone out when you use a risk-free rate. You calculate much larger present value of future liability. I think, but just for understanding, not using in practice, but understanding where are we at if we use the risk-free rate to calculate the liability.
Yeah, and the risk-free rate, the way we look at it is it kind of provides two things. If you use a risk-free rate, that would be the cost of taking risk off the table if you discount at a risk-free rate. So, and that number is huge. I can't remember, but
Yeah.
it's basically double what your costs are right now. I mean, so that would be the cost of removing the risk. The other way to look at it was public plan actuaries like to look at it. That's the benefit we get by investing in a diversified portfolio is that we don't, we get a lower cost by using that and getting a higher expected return. So that investment earnings can do more of the work and less work to the contributions.
I'm interested to see in that number.
Based on the 2023 valuation, the liability at 7% was about $90 billion. And the risk-free rate that we used as of June 30th, 23 was 3.65%, and the liability was $143 billion. So it changed the funded ratio from about 80% to 50% funded.
Not too bad. Thank you.
So just for clarification, we're disclosing the risk-free rate in our report.
Yes.
But this board is making decisions based on our robust portfolio, our diversified portfolio, and all the work you do on the portfolio. So we're making decisions based on the assumed rate of return.
Can I ask a quick question on this slide for the inactives? What's the cause of as of right now, it looks to be a small spread and then it looks like it gets bigger over time. What's the reason for that slight growth? I mean, these are in billions of dollars, so that will matter to us. What's the cause behind that?
Are you talking about the
orange?
On the left-hand side?
On the left-hand side, yeah.
Yeah, so inactives we sometimes call deferred. Those are people who worked for the county, haven't started getting their benefit, but are entitled to a benefit going forward. So those people, you can see right now, they're not getting a benefit, but as they retire, then payments start, and that's what you're seeing is as we project those inactive those current deferred members retire in the future, then we get, as we get more and more retired, then the orange gets bigger, but then as we go forward, then we project mortality, so then it gets smaller.
I get that. I'm more wondering, the question is why is the number of inactives likely to stay the same? And is this, I guess what I'm trying to say is, are there going to be more, less, or the same number relative of inactives that will be going forward into the future? Because if that number goes up, then that orange number goes up, then that's something we need to take into consideration.
We don't expect that number to, LACERA is a pretty mature plan, so it would kind of stay pretty stable between your retiree population, your inactive population, and your active population.
Okay.
It's gonna, obviously, things are gonna happen and change over time, but as I said, you're very mature, so we'd expect it to stay pretty stable.
Okay, that's helpful.
All right. Go ahead, Nick. Or Craig.
Thank you. Excuse me. So when we performed the risk assessment analysis, like we did this year, two of the main things we're trying to do is to identify the risks that could affect the future financial condition of LACERA. And then once we've identified those, we're trying to assess the potential impact that each of those risks could have on the financial condition. As Nick mentioned, there are different risks that can have different impacts. And so we're just really trying to get a good grasp on what the potential impact is. So when we do the valuation, Nick mentioned, we're using a lot of demographic and economic assumptions to estimate the liability and the cost of the plan. But ultimately, the cost of a pension plan is going to be driven by the actual experience and not necessarily by the assumptions. And so that's where a lot of the risk arises, is when that actual experience is different than what we estimated it to be, because that's going to change the liability and the future costs that need to be met by the employer. So in this analysis, we're focusing primarily on the impact when actual experience does differ from those assumptions and what impact that can have on the financial condition of LACERA. We know that there are many reasons, some direct reasons that can lead to some of these risks, and then there's other indirect reasons, the global economy, some of the macro environment, governance and operational issues. They can affect, can lead to risk and create risk for LACERA, but a lot of those are quite difficult to measure directly, or their impacts are not exclusive. So it's hard to nail those down. And so that's why we're really focusing a lot on when there's differences between actual and expected experience. However, when we do the experience study every 3 years, we are considering a lot of those issues to try and decide if it's necessary to factor any of those into the assumptions that we're recommending for LACERA at that time. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this chart, we are showing and we're identifying the main risks that we've identified for LACERA, and we're assigning a ranking to them. There's no numerical basis to this. There is some of our judgment included here as to the sort of where they're positioned on this chart. But as far as which risks we view as the highest, you see those over on the right-hand side of the chart, and then we're ranking them down towards the lower risks. Nick mentioned the investment return is the risk that we view to have the potential to have the greatest impact on the future financial condition. And that's primarily because a relatively small difference in investment return compared to the 7% assumption can have a fairly sizable impact on the financial condition, much more so than a similar deviation on other assumptions. And so just as an example, if the investment return in 1 year was 6% or 8% compared to the assumed 7%, with the $70 to $80 billion portfolio, that's a $700 or $800 change in the asset portfolio, and that has an impact on the funded ratio, and then that starts flowing through into the employer contribution rates that need to be made to make that up. And some of these other risks that we show here, it's just it would take a large deviation for them to their impact to get close to that. But we just moving quickly from right to left here. After investment risk, we view longevity, so that's life expectancy, and other demographic risks as the next highest risk. So the demographic risk, the demographic assumptions we make are for things like when will people retire, when will they leave employment, how much salary increases will people get. And so if that experience differs, it can impact the amount of benefits people earn, the liability of the fund, and so forth. And so we have that as a second risk. Compensation and payroll, we have those both, they're both in here. And so that's really the likelihood that potentially on the payroll side, if LACERA's aggregate payroll was to grow at a different rate than we expect, that can have an impact on the employer contribution rate because that's determined based on the payroll. And moving to the left, contribution risk and retiree COLA risk, we view those as relatively lower risks. And for the retiree COLA, the annual COLAs that retirees receive, they're based on CPI, the local CPI. And so even though inflation has been high recently, there are some caps in the plan on the amount of COLAs that retirees can receive. So that does give some protection there. So that's why we viewed that as a lower risk, even though inflation has been, recently at least, has been high. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sort of impact, an overview of sort of what's happened over the last 20 years and how some of these different risks have materialized. The chart on the right here, we're identifying sort of the sources of the changes in the unfunded liability, where blue bars are the changes in the unfunded liability from year to year due to investment return different than expected, and the green bars are changes due to all other experience. So the positive numbers here, above the x-axis, those are when the unfunded liability has increased, so experience has been less favorable, and the negative numbers are when experience has been positive. And so the real sort of takeaway here, as we talked about investment return being the larger risk, I mean, I think you can see here that there's a lot more volatility in the change in the unfunded liability due to the investment risk rather than compared to the other experience. One thing I'd point out here, the orange bars, they show up on this chart roughly every 3 years. And so those are when there's an experience study performed and assumptions change. And so then the unfunded liability is adjusted when those assumptions change. The main driver on these orange bars in most periods is when the investment return assumption has been lowered. Over the last 20 years or so, the investment return assumption has come down from 8% to 7%. And that's just reflecting the expectations of investment return based on LACERA's portfolio and capital market assumptions over that time. Next slide, please. So LACERA is what we consider to be a mature pension plan. It has accumulated significant assets to be able to pay benefits to retirees when they become due. That's a good thing. I mean, it's a very good thing to have had that foresight to pre-fund the plan for those benefits. However, having those assets, I mean, that's what we've kind of talked about with investment return. I mean, having that level of assets does bring along certain risks for a mature plan that a less mature plan might not have. So over time, I mean, as that asset pool has grown, the liabilities have increased. Let me take a step back here for a second. If we think about a less mature plan, a plan in its early stages, it doesn't really have any retirees. Its population is largely all active members. It has very little assets. So any investment return risk is relatively low because there's a small pool of assets. But as the plan matures and people start to retire, the liability's grown, the asset pool has grown relative to the payroll. And so now the active payroll that's supporting the unfunded liability, it's also having to support the retiree liability. And so there's a leveraging impact can come in there. So as we look at this chart on the left here, we sort of see the progression of some of that maturity for LACERA, and we're using the ratio of active to retirees to show that here. So you can see about 20 years ago, there was approximately 2 active LACERA members for every retiree. But over the last 20 years or so, that has gradually declined so that in 23, we're down to a ratio of about 1.3 active members to every retiree. So that balance has really shifted. And so we've got more, that shows the maturity, but also gives an idea that there's more sensitivity now to the contribution rates and the funded ratio for LACERA.
Hey, Craig, at what ratio would it be concerning to us as a board in that active versus retiree count? Should we be, what threshold, right? If it's coming down when it was 2 to 1, whatever else, now it's 1.3 to 1. Let's just say by virtue of pure productivity, the hiring needs of the county softens, right? Yeah. AI is great. Current employees are producing more, doing more, whatever else you there. At what point would it become meaningful, like to us, in terms of that engagement? Is it below 1 to 1? Is it?
I would say it's already meaningful, and Craig is going to talk about how when we have, because your assets pool versus your payroll is pretty significant, when you do have an investment loss, it's going over what that investment loss, as Craig said, just a 1% investment loss is what, $700 million. And that's what, you've got a $9 billion payroll, so it's 10% of payroll for 1 year. So I mean, it's just typical of what public sector plans are going through. There's not any bright line, but that's one of the reasons we have this risk assessment, is to kind of to give you an idea of where you're at right now. As I said, there's not no magic number, but you're in a typical boat that where other systems are, and we use methods to try to kind of smooth that out, but you're going to get some contribution rate volatility based on asset returns.
I agree. I mean, I think it is very typical of other mature plans, this pattern, getting closer to that 1-to-1 ratio. And it's one measure to keep track of, to sort of to understand what the concern is, but I don't know that there's one magic number. I would agree with Nick
Well, I mean,
to say that.
Yeah, I think it's, and it kind of echoes what John has communicated to us as a board previously in terms of the overall posture towards our portfolio, is that a loss is more meaningful in our negative cash flow operations than any kind of undue stretch or risk to try and capture some gain, right? So you're trying to stay in a tighter range where we're maybe not going to capture as much upside as we could. Okay, that reflects the fact that that in that risk return ratio, that a loss kind of means more to us in where we currently stand than potentially the reach for additional return.
Yeah, and I think then like John's, I think, described to you, it's all just becomes about managing that situation and that level of risk. Because yet another measure of the maturity is because LACERA's in that negative cash flow position, but that is also a natural, pension plans by their design, they were expected to become negative cash flow at some point because you've been pre-funding for so many years that at some point they get there. And so, yeah, I think it's now just understanding those risks and managing them.
Right.
And so hopefully we're able to add to that understanding here.
Could I just follow up on that question? I mean, that's a great question. I know you said there's no magic number, but if you could go back into history, I mean, just because right now we're about 1.3, right? The ratio. Is 4-to-1 good? Is 3-to-1 good? I mean, what would be? I mean, in a perfect world, we could get more active employees. What would be a good ratio?
So I think that becomes important just when you're determining the funding as a percentage of the payroll. And so the greater your ratio of payroll is to your liabilities, the more sustainable that is. So the dollar amount, so if you have an unfunded liability, your dollar amount of amortizing that unfunded kind of stays the same regardless of your payroll. But when you're measuring it as a percentage of your payroll, that's when it really matters. So if theoretically, I think if the payroll shrunk, I mean, the contribution rate would go up as a percentage. So that's kind of the risk we're measuring. The dollars would stay the same, so it would just be a bigger percentage on a smaller payroll.
And if it was a higher ratio, then basically contributions for active employees will technically go down, and the county's contribution would go down as well. Can you look at it that way?
This wouldn't affect, so the members aren't paying to any of the unfunded contribution. So the member contribution rates would stay the same. And that's just tied to the benefits that they're earning. So this is really more the risk on the employer side for the unfunded liability.
Yeah, thank you, Greg.
Yeah. And so we kind of covered a bit of that there, but on the right-hand side of this chart, another way to sort of quantify this is one of the measures we have is what we call the asset volatility ratio. So again, that's just a measure of your assets to your payroll, how many times payroll is the asset portfolio. And so generally the higher that number is, then the more sensitivity there is on the contribution rate when you're funding as a percentage of payroll. So for LACERA, the assets are about 7.6 times the annual payroll. So that's about a roughly $9.5 billion payroll with a $72 billion asset value. And so what that means ultimately is with that level of sensitivity for LACERA, if the actual return is 1% more or less than that 7% assumed return, we projected that employer contribution rate is going to increase by about 0.5% of payroll, just with that change. So just to give you an idea there. Next slide, please. So one more way to look at the impact that investment return can have on the employer contribution rate. We do look at this 1 year shock analysis, shock return scenario. And so we're essentially saying what would happen if in the first year we got a 0% return on investments compared to the assumed 7%. So the blue lines and bars here, They're showing the projected employer contribution rate on the left, and the projected funded ratio and unfunded liability on the right. The blue lines and bars, if we just earned 7% every year and all other assumptions were met. The orange lines and bars, they're saying, well, what happens if the first year we got a 0% investment return, but then every year thereafter we reverted to that 7% annual return. And so on the left here, in the bottom line is that we're projecting, if all assumptions are met, there's about a 25% employer contribution rate over the next 18 years or so. Whereas with that 1 year, 0% return scenario, we're projecting that that contribution rate is going to increase to about 30% of payroll. There is a bit of a phase-in over that 5-year period through the asset smoothing method where we smooth in the investment gains and losses. But overall, that employer contribution rate would increase about 5% per year of payroll, which on the almost $10 billion of payroll would be about a $500 million a year extra contribution needed from the employer. And then you can kind of see on the right-hand side that, yeah, perhaps not surprisingly, with that 0% return, the orange bars, the unfunded liability grows a bit faster over the next few years. The funded ratio is a bit lower until ultimately they catch up over time.
What's the purpose of having it be zero? Because that's the case and the world's over. So why not just have
just a 1 year zero return?
Even if 1 year being zero, that'd be the end of the world too.
Right.
Why not have like the risk-free rate or something where something that's more tenable? Because it just feels like it's good to know in theory, but I mean at that point, for there to be a whole year of there being zero returns across every asset class everywhere around the world, we'd be having a lot bigger problems.
That happens.
Last year,
I think it's one out of 6 or one out of 5, 1 out of 6. You're going to have a 0% return. So
across the world.
Well, just on LACERA's investment portfolio.
Yeah. Just because, equities go down, once every 5 years, you're going to get the S&P 500 is going to have a negative return.
But that would mean that all the other things that we're doing to mitigate that risk would also go down to zero, right?
Well, or the equities go down 10% and the other stuff mitigates it. And if, for example, when LACERA had a 0% return 2 years ago, most public fund, I think the average public plan fund was actually down more like negative 5%.
Interesting. Okay.
So, and the one thing I would say is your comment that these things tend to be, that 0% return a couple of years ago, that followed the 25% return. These things, a lot of times the investment's obviously cyclical. You're going to have up years and down years. So this is, a 0% return with no recovery.
Got it.
So,
okay.
And as you can see, I mean, it's not, obviously it would not be good, from the county's perspective to have a 5% increase in percent of pay contribution, but that's not an unrealistic thing to happen. Things, as I said, we've stayed pretty level around 25% for a number of years, and that's because we've had ups and downs.
Got it. Okay, I think I saw it as being something completely different, where like nothing went well, but you were talking about netting them out, so I get it. Okay.
Tim, I saw you about to walk up. Were you going to contribute to the conversation or just switching seats?
No, happy to jump in on that. So when you do look at the overall asset allocation, you still have about 75% of the risk budget is to growth assets. So when those do go down in an amount that's 10 or greater percent, that impacts the plan tremendously. We saw a similar market environment in 2022 when if you had a 60-40 portfolio, that portfolio would have been around 18% in that calendar year. So I think it is reasonable to think in the near future you could have 0% return scenarios. That's why we try to focus on the longer term, and ideally that gets smoothed out, and our projections are based on 10 and 20-year outlooks for each of the asset classes, but that 0 is a very realistic thing to consider.
Thank you, Tim. All right, Greg.
Next slide, please. So in our report, we have included some more analysis for each of these other risks, but for our presentation here, we're just going to summarize some of these here rather than showing more charts. We do think the risks associated with these are a bit smaller, but just to run through these quickly here. On the salary and compensation side, The risk there is that there'll be increases in compensation greater than we're expecting that current employees will have. And so that creates higher benefit projections and higher liabilities. And so that can cause an increase in the costs of the plan. However, again, when measured as a percentage of payroll, that can have an offsetting effect because if you've had higher pay increases, you've got a higher payroll base, so it can mitigate some of the increase in the employer contribution rate. Payroll growth, the risk on the payroll growth would be that there'd be a decrease in payroll or growth slower than we expected. And again, that could cause an increase in the contribution rate. I talked earlier about the retiree COLAs, there being a lot of mitigation there because of the caps. So the high inflation doesn't directly flow through onto the retiree COLAs, it affects it, but it's not a straight one-to-one ratio. On the mortality assumption, I mean, actuaries, there's a lot of data out there, and actuaries like to think we've got a fairly good, we can predict overall mortality fairly well. The big risk is that there'd be some breakthrough, a medical breakthrough, that could cause some sort of a jump in life expectancy. So, I mean, there's a risk to all pension plans if that were to happen. On the contribution side, the main risk for a contribution risk would be a failure of employers to make the required contributions that come out with valuation. That's not been an issue for LACERA. We don't foresee it being an issue, so we're not commenting that we think there's a risk there. We're just saying, on the chart, we had it as a very low risk because we think it's a very low risk, but it does exist there.
Yeah, and that contribution risk is what has caused problems. And outside of the state of California, there's been some well-known systems that have had issues, and that's because a lot of it was because their employers were not making the actually required contribution.
Quick question, would there be a different weighting of the risk that you have on your spectrum if we were 70% funded versus 90% funded versus 80% funded? So the more we get funded, does the risk prioritization stay the same? Distribution stay the same? Does it focus on a narrower set of risks, just investment risks?
I mean, I think if you've got less assets, the investment risk is, a good or a bad year on the investment side is going to have less impact on you, but then you've got more risk there because you don't have the assets to begin with. So I think it changes it, but I think overall the general order of the risks stay fairly consistent.
Yeah, because one of the questions I've had is just whether or not, like, how ambitious, I'm using my term, should we be about our funded status, right? Like, what is, what are the trade-offs associated with moving up that scale towards funders, to funding status? And then, again, if we're thinking best in class, we're thinking eventually getting to 100 billion in assets, that moving up, like, what should we also be considering that impact to the funded status then allows us to do from our overall approach to our strategic asset allocation or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, as Craig mentioned, I mean, having a higher funding ratio, you get more year-to-year investment risk, but the long-term risk is going to be less. And the thing I look at is granted, year to year, your returns are going to be up and down, but you look at how much of that return is paying benefits. I mean, those plans are underfunded. They're having to make way more contributions. Way more of those contributions are going to paying in benefit payments, whereas LACERA is fairly well funded, so a large chunk of those returns are going to cover your benefit payments, which is long-term what you want to do. That's the efficiency of a pre-funding a plan, is that you can use those returns to pay your benefits.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide.
And I'll let Nick talk about some of the mitigation of the risks.
Yeah, so the purpose of the risk assessment is to understand the risk to LACERA's funding. And sometimes it may come off as negative, as actuaries tend to do. But for you, I think the next logical question is what can LACERA do to mitigate risk? And we've actually had a good discussion about that. And you've talked about, Jared Jones talked about the protecting against the downside. It's like investment people and actuaries too. Pain is way worse. Having having one good year and then one bad year, that pain is felt more than the good year. So having that, having LACERA's has a fairly low standard deviation, so you have less volatility in your returns probably than some funds. So that's kind of an example of what you're doing to mitigate your risks. And overall, we believe that LACERA is doing a good job of mitigating the risks. Obviously, if we would be coming here and, and telling you if we didn't, things were going well. And we kind of highlight three things that the board's doing. Obviously, on the asset side, your asset allocation, obviously spent a lot of time working on that. On the liability side, you review the assumptions every 3 years to give us the best estimate that we can of future liabilities. And on the funding side, LACERA reviews its funding, and we believe the funding is reasonable, taking into account the trade-off between year-to-year changes, but long-term making progress towards getting to that 100% funded. And we cite that LACERA a few years ago reduced the period to fund the unfunded liability, which we thought was a positive change and definitely reduces the risk of long-term low funding levels. Moving to the next slide. So then can LACERA further reduce its risk? The answer is sort of yes and no. Reducing risk is generally a trade-off, and it gets to that risk, the risk-free rate. Well, yeah, you could convert LACERA's plan to a risk-free rate, but then either you'd have a very low chance of hitting that a 7% return assumption, or you'd need to change your investment return assumption to reduce it, and then you'd have an immediate risk of very high contribution rates. So there's always a trade-off with risk, and we think that LACERA is striking a pretty good balance on that right now. So next slide. So, favorite actual words in conclusion. So as a mature plan, we talked about LACERA is subject to a number of risks, and particularly that year-to-year changes in the investment returns can have a significant risk. As we talked about, the smoothing LACERA has kind of mitigates that, and there's other methods with the asset allocation LACERA uses to mitigate it. So LACERA has a number of mechanisms to address risks. So bottom line, we're not recommending changes. We think LACERA is doing a pretty good job of addressing risk, and just continue to monitor it going forward. So that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Nick and Craig. Any other questions from my colleagues at all?
I just, I love these actuary reports and
Says no one ever, but great.
It's true, and I got a point to make. If you look at the projections and the numbers, total membership population's up, the pay rate value is up, right? Monthly benefit is up. The AAL is also up, and the fund is up almost $4 billion, and the UAAL is also up, and all that equals an increase in our funded ratio, right? And where I'm going with this is that, this is validation for LACERA staff that they're, moving in the right direction. Despite the climate and what happened last year, and if I'm wrong, let me know, but it really points to, that's why I like this. It validates, it's part of that process, and it validates that what's going on here is working. And I hope if my simple brain can figure that out, I know there's a lot more smart people in the room that I hope they take that away from it. I do appreciate the work on it, and kudos to staff for swimming in these waters with everything. So, thanks.
Yeah, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate everyone's comments. And that's the thing we look at. Year to year, things are going to bounce around, but how are we doing long term, and where are we projected to go? And it's a positive picture going forward. So,
Yeah, and I would add that, yeah, even though maybe we talk about some of the bad things happen here as part of when we talk about risk generally, I think your point is very well made that and I think we feel comfortable that with all the decisions made by the board and the work being done by staff, where LACERA is positioned and the outlook going forward is a good place to be in.
Yeah,
And
we're baking a
it's
cake and it tastes good.
So for all the negative comments we made, we're actually very positive about the outlook. Yeah.
All right, you gonna trade out? Or you wanna?
All right. Okay. So, any other questions as it relates to the actuarial risk assessment report? And then I think you guys are gonna do
one more.
Yeah, an encore with the Triennial actuarial projects.
Great.
So let's move into that. Go ahead, Ted. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, give us just a quick second and we'll transition over here. And again, thank you to this board for your time and attention to these actuarial matters. We really appreciate it. Okay, so the next item is a little bit different. We're going to talk about the OPEB side, and this board doesn't typically talk about that. That falls on the Board of Retirement side, and I'll explain that a little bit further in terms of detail. But what we wanted to do today, well, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. I'd like to introduce Janet Jennings. She is with Milliman. She's from the OPEB consulting group. If you'll recall from the last month's meeting when we talked about awarding the next contract to Milliman, Milliman serves us with two teams. One is the pension team, that's Nick and Craig, and there are, of course, supporting actuaries. And then we have an OPEB team out of the Boise, Idaho office, and that is Robert Schmidt and Janet Jennings. So Janet's representing the OPEB team today. Janet's been part of the OPEB team since inception, since about 2006 when we started reporting on the OPEB side, and she has over 24 years of experience, so we're happy that she was able to make it today. This session is really an educational session, again, and it's information. We're encouraging questions and discussions if we haven't drained all of your energy yet. The goal in this presentation, hopefully, is to establish the link between all of the work this board did on the strategic asset allocation, specifically for the OPEB trust, and how that's impacting the OPEB trust economic assumptions. So we're just trying to sort of bridge that gap for this board and bring those two pieces together. I'll explain a little bit more about this in a second, but the Board of Retirement generally approves the OPEB economic assumptions. All right, so with that, next slide, please. Okay, so I'll provide a little bit of an overview. I'll try to get things into context, and then Milliman will dive into the OPEB economic assumptions with their materials. Next slide, please. Great, okay, and so you already know this, but your responsibility obviously surrounds the investments for the OPEB trust and the pension trust and all of the things you do regarding that in terms of the pension plan, annual evaluations, experience studies on the pension side. Next slide, please. The Board of Retirement, they administer the benefits and they look at the actual evaluations for the retiree healthcare or the OPEB program. Very similar process. They have an annual evaluation and they have an experience study, which is what we're currently working on with them. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is getting into a little bit more detail in terms of timeline. Obviously, your board approved the strategic asset allocation with Jude and Makita back in April. And the next date, I have an error on this slide. I didn't consult with Jude, but you approved the policy ranges in May and the policy benchmarks. And then, so that's erroneous, the information on this slide. But obviously, this meeting, you approved the investment policy statement. So just wanted to clarify that. I got a little excited about approving all this stuff. And finally, for July, we're going to go to the Board of Retirement for the OPEB experience study. So this is sort of that bridge meeting between the work you've done and when we're going to go to the Board of Retirement. Okay. Next slide, please. Getting into just a little bit more detail, this board sets the demographic assumptions for the pension plan. That's in the upper left-hand bubble. Those demographic assumptions carry over from the pension side to the OPEB side, but the OPEB side does have some healthcare specific assumptions that they approve for the demographics. So just wanted to, one of the things we do as well is we defer the experience studies so that the pension assumptions are approved first and then they carry over to the OPEB side. Okay. Next slide, please. Economic. So this slide's a little bit different. Obviously, this board is responsible for the pension and the OPEB trusts. Again, there's some economic assumptions that carry over, and as well, the Board of Retirement approves the OPEB trust investment return assumption based on Milliman's work and Makita and another study that's done on the outside. So Milliman brings that to the Board of Retirement, but essentially a lot of that information is based on what the work of this board. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, I'll try to wrap it up. We tried to create sort of a process flow. This board, obviously, investment policy and objectives, you're focusing on the asset side, all of the things we've been talking about today, both in these presentations and in this meeting, strategic asset allocation, investment policy statement. I think you'll talk a little bit later about investment performance returns. So you've got sort of the asset side managed. Then we shift over to the liability side. We bring Milliman in. We talk about actuals versus expecteds. I think Nick talked about that a little bit earlier in the prior presentation. Where are we at on the liabilities in terms of measuring those? First, we look at the assumptions, and then we look at the valuation, which essentially is the calculations. Where does the plan land? What do the numbers look like? So managing the assets and the liabilities is really what's driving our management of the pension plan. And so with that, unless there's any questions for me, I'm going to kick it over to Milliman to start on their slides.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Ted did a good job kind of talking about how we're trying to link everything together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to link the pension to the OPEB and then turn it over to Janet, because I don't claim to be an expert on the OPEB. If we can move to the next slide. In particular, I'm going to talk about the difference on the economic assumptions between OPEB and the pension plan, and then talk about how the plan is funded and how that's different between the OPEB and the pension. Then I'm going to turn it over to Janet to give you some additional education on the OPEB plan. And then the crux of this meeting is to just keep you in the loop on the OPEB trust investment return. As Ted said, that's the one that the Board of Retirement approves, but obviously you have a significant say in the way the trust is invested, so we want to keep you in the loop on that. So moving to
Nick, real quick, let me
sorry.
do this. Let me take a chairman's prerogative here. As you can see, I'm a regular consumer of water. Can we just take a 5-minute break? Because I want to be able to sit through this with consciousness and just come back at 5 minutes till. Can we do that, please? Sure. Thank you.
I'm gonna take the break too.
Okay.
Recording stopped.
I just want to going back to what I said. I mean,
Recording in progress.
my goal here is to kind of link the pension and the OPEB and then turn it over to Janet to kind of give you a little education on the OPEB and then particularly talking about the investment return assumption. So I am going to talk, if we move to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the economic assumptions. I'm not going to talk too much about the first few, but I want to talk about really contrast the pension and the OPEB. If you think about the pension, you get these, the retirement benefits, they go up based on future COLAs. And as Craig talked about, those COLAs are capped. So we have a pretty good estimate of where those retirement benefits are going in the future because we have a pretty good idea what the COLAs are going to be. On the OPEB side, the driver of future benefits levels is healthcare trend. That is how much the cost of healthcare goes up in the future. That is a greater number, expected to be a greater number than what the COLA number is. It's also expected to be much more variable. So that's really, if you're talking about risk, that's really the big variable on health on the OPEB side. That's a bigger impact than on the pension side with the COLAs. And then as I said, the big one, obviously, on the pension side is the investment return assumption. As we talked about, when we use our investment return assumption is set approximately equal to the expected return on the portfolio. It's a little more complicated on the OPEB side, depending on how the employer is specifically funding the OPEB pension. If you're not fully actuarial at funding, then you can't necessarily just use the expected return as your discount rate, and I'll let Janet talk a little bit about that. But if we can go forward 2 more slides. This, I want to contrast the funding principles. I talked about how the pension plan's funded. OPEB is somewhat similar. You get contribution, investment, or earnings that ultimately pay benefits. That's the idea. But on the contribution side, there's kind of like 3, I'd say, main differences. One is on the pension side, you get member contributions and employer contributions. That is, active employees are contributing towards their pension. That is not true on the OPEB side. On the OPEB side, the funding is from the employer. Second thing is the employers can fund on a pay-as-you-go basis, or where they're just basically making contributions, then those contributions go on benefits, and we're not accumulating a pool of assets. And in that case, if you do a pay-as-you-go, that investment earnings just go out the window. But as you're aware, as you're obviously working on the funding of the OPEB trusts, a lot of your bigger employers, the county, are trying to pre-fund your OPEB trust, and therefore that's so that's more like the pension plan, and then investment earnings obviously become a much bigger deal.
That pre-funding is on an annual basis, a regular basis, based on, well, I guess she's going to get into it.
Well, yeah, actually, that's the third difference, which is the contributions for the pension plan. Board of Investments works as actuary to set that contribution rate annually each year. On the OPEB side, it's really employer determined. They may listen to what the actuary has to say, but it's up to them how they want to fund it. And that's why you have some employers funding on pay-as-you-go basis and some actually working towards actual pre-funding. So that's the other difference on the contributions. And then on the benefit sides, obviously it's different benefits. OPEB benefits, primary benefit is going to be your medical health care. But there are several other ones, and Jan's going to kind of talk about how those kind of play out. As I said, medical is the biggest one, and then how the other ones kind of relate on the OPEB side. So that's kind of the funding concept. So I'm going to turn it over to Janet to kind of talk about the OPEB plan.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome to the OPEB team. On the next slide, we are going to talk through what the actuary delivers for the OPEB program. The first is an annual funding valuation, similar to the retirement program, where we review the funded status. The difference is that we present this to the Board of Retirement rather than the Board of Investments, even though you, the Board of Investments, are responsible for the investments of the OPEB trust. Every 3 years, similar to retirement, but on a 1 year after basis, we conduct an investigation of experience for the OPEB program. We determine a different investment return assumption because the OPEB trust is different from the retirement trust. We also determine the healthcare trends, and as Nick was mentioning, we look at a lot of different inputs, including the inflation input, because that builds into the healthcare trend. On the demographic side, we look at what is the likelihood that once someone retires, they will actually enroll in a medical plan or a retiree dental vision plan. And what is the likelihood that they will enroll in Medicare Part B? Once they do enroll, we determine assumptions on which plan they will select, because there's a variety of plans they can choose from on the medical and dental vision side. And if they do enroll in one of those plans, we also look at the assumption of if they will enroll their spouse and or children. Our last deliverable, core deliverable, I should say, is on the financial accounting side. We produce a GASB 75 disclosure, which is akin to the GASB 68 disclosure for employers. And this information is included in the ACFR. So those are our 3 main deliverables. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how the actuarial accrued liability is split up by the benefit type. In 2022, the total actuarial accrued liability was $23 billion, and just over 3/4 of that is for retiree medical. 18% is for the Medicare Part B reimbursement, followed by 5% for dental and vision, and lastly, 1% for the retiree death benefit of $5,000.
Question for you, and maybe I should know this by now, having been here 4 years, but is the retiree medical, are those just the premiums on the insurance we pay for the members, or is it actually some fee for service level of the care that we have to do there?
It is based on the premiums, the employer's portion of the premiums, and that is trended forward to project benefits in the future and then discounted back.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, I didn't know if there was any like out of pocket or any other kind of like components of the plans that we were also had liability for.
Oh, it does not include the out of pocket, but built into those premiums is a per contract per month charge that helps to pay for some of the administrative expenses.
Got it. Okay.
And then following up on that, healthcare costs go up a lot faster than the rest of the economy. Is there an assumption, well, I know there's an assumption, but is the assumption that it's going to continue growing at the same faster 7-8% pace? Or is it, what we're looking at some point that healthcare does not keep growing so quickly?
Thank you, Trustee Fay. I really appreciate that question. We do use a long-term trend assumption that's through the Society of Actuaries with Professor Getson. And in that those trend assumptions, we anticipate that once medical healthcare reaches a certain percentage of GDP, then it would just follow more or less with inflation. So the trend, at a certain point, enough's going to be enough, and people aren't going to want to pay more than GDP.
They're about 14 to 15% of GDP, right? As healthcare costs are typically, on a national basis.
Yeah, currently I think it's at 19%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, gotcha. Okay.
But in the short term, the assumption is for higher than inflation, that it's eventually grading to that point.
What's
but
that
not
percentage
over a long period of
What's
time.
that percent of GDP? Because I just want to know what is enough for.
Yeah, I can quickly get to that. I believe it's 10%, but I'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the liabilities by member group. On slide 10, the next slide, you can see that half of the liabilities are borne by actives. And then just under half of those are by the retirees. Now, the deferred vested group is akin to that orange sliver that Trustee Fay was asking about. Those are terminated members that have not yet retired. And those 9,000 current group is about 2%.
Yeah, and just the active population, that's for retiree OPEB benefits, once they retire. So we're pre-recognizing that those people are going to be retired and estimating their costs.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So on the next slide, this shows the history of of the OPEB program's liabilities and assets. Starting in 2006, the liabilities were over 20 billion and there were no assets. Then in 2014, that's when the OPEB trust began and there was 480 million in seed money invested. The liabilities did increase to 28.55 billion because of a lower discount rate. But the discount rate dropped in 2018 such that the discount rate increased, so the liabilities dropped. The assets have been building up over time as the employers are contributing an increasing amount each year. And as of 2022, the assets are over $2 billion. On the next slide, we can see in the future, we project that for the county employer, the assets will rise from 2 billion to about 41 billion in 2052. In addition, the liabilities will also increase from 20 billion in 2022 to 70 billion in 2052. Despite the common increase, on the next slide, you'll see that the funded ratio will also increase from 11% to 59%. This increase of the actual value of assets over the actual accrued liability will lead to a more stable plan, as you were asking about, Trustee Green. On the next slide.
Sorry, Janet, can I just pause real quick? So just a point on this particular slide, we did, to make it simple for the presentation, we prepared these slides for the county, and we kind of glossed over this again to keep it simple, but the Superior Court and LACERA are also invested in the OPEB trust. So in terms of funded ratio, this slide is showing the 11% for the county. The court is about 6% funded as of 2022, and LACERA is about 14% funded. So just wanted to link that back to the budget policy that this board approved this morning. LACERA's budget includes an allowance where we can contribute LACERA as an entity as part of the OPEB trust an additional amount. So that's where this is showing up. So we're 14% funded as an organization compared to the county's 11%. So I just wanted to
And then allow me to ask a question I think I know the answer to, but I think it's worth making sure it's publicly noted. But as far as the funds are concerned, they're treated wholly separate. There's no commingling or no, for lack of a better word, hidden risk at all in one fund to the other. I just want to draw the distinction that OPEB and the LACERA fund are truly distinct from each other.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Granger, yeah, then relative to each other, we've identified they're separate entities, but using this as the baseline, the other two will also probably project out. The assumption would be that, the 14%, I mean, it would parallel this, right? The trajectory
Of the LACERA plan?
the LACERA and the
Yeah.
court system.
Yeah. With
Yes.
LACERA would parallel.
LACERA would parallel.
It's a fair assumption, yeah, and
Yes.
so would the court system. Okay, that's great, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I will say with LACERA's ability to contribute more, their funded status may increase more rapidly.
A real quick question here. So it's really nice that we have the seed funding and start investing, start earning. I'm just curious, where's that seed money coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have to go back. Back in 2013, the county had some contributions for pension on deposit at LACERA in a reserve account. at that time was about 450 million. So the county decided that they wanted some seed money for the OPEB trust. So they said, okay, we'll contribute cash to the OPEB trust and we'll use the pension contributions to fund our pension plan obligations. So they sort of offset by giving us new seed money for the OPEB trust and using the money already on deposit for the pension side.
From employer.
From the employer, from the county, that's correct, yes. And then we had two subsequent, LACERA at that time as an agency decided to mirror and to invest on a proportional basis in the OPEB trust. So we set up that arrangement. And as well, a year later, the Superior Court decided they wanted to invest in the OPEB trust. And so their funding is a little bit different. Theirs is more of a ad hoc as they can based on their budget surplus, sort of. So we just sort of let them fund as they please.
That's a great decision. Thank you.
One other last question. On this slide, how much of these average returns are from investment performance versus contributions? So we see how it becomes more funded, but there's obviously a benefit to investing, and with that benefit comes like the compounding returns. To see how much of it, like what the benefit is, not just for the county, and then also for LACERA, what does it look like from like how much is being contributed versus how much of it is coming from the fact that we're investing in and making the trust just more valuable to our investment returns?
Yeah, we, that's actually detailed more in our GASB 75 report. One thing to keep in mind is that with these funding programs with the county and LACERA, they're increasing their contribution each year by about 58 million more than the prior year.
Okay.
So each year it'll vary.
But yeah, initially it's going to be mainly contributions because you're not getting the benefit on the investment returns, which I think is what you're getting at.
Yep.
And as you go along, then you're going to get more of the benefit of the investment returns, being able to pay the premiums. But it's going to take a while, and that's why it's so hard. You know, it's hard to start the OPEB trust when you're it's starting at zero.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's why it was really good that the county was able to get that seed money started to get this process started. But it's going to be a long process, as you can see, over a 30-year period of time. You're still not getting all the way to 100%. But
Yeah, I think what I'm more thinking is if that's shown, then it's always good. It's like it's a rainy day fund, right? You're using this to end up having a better return in the future. So if we show that in a way that the county and the courts and everyone can see, oh wow, this actually is a really good investment. Maybe ad hoc and less may not be as useful as doing more. So that we can be more sustainable on the go forward basis. That might be something that'd be helpful for them to see. I think LACERA, we understand that. That's why we have that's why we're higher funded. But that 59% is going to be higher for us just because we know that we can put more in. I think that for everyone to be able to see that could be real value.
Okay.
Laura, did you want to say something? I saw that you pop up.
Thank you, Chair Jones. Trustee Fate, to your question or to your statement, that's one of the advantages of the budget policy that you just approved earlier today, and making a permanent commitment to providing additional funding for our OPEB. So one of the things we'll be working with Milliman to do is to present some graphs and charts to help us present that information. You'll be able to see it, our members will be able to see it, and our county partners and employers will be able to see it. We'll be able to see the impact of that additional investment up front. So we've already seen the difference in our funded ratio, and we've only been doing this like I think 2 or 3 years. So it's already making a difference. We're going to be able to fund that faster. That means we're going to be able to start leveraging the investment returns to pay. This pay as you go is very expensive. And so the county does realize this, and I think they're doing the most they feel they can afford. I do absolutely think they recognize that, and that's why they started pre-funding, and their goal is to get to that actuarial required or actually determined contribution and not have to do a pay-go. So just recognizing it's going to take a long time, but I think it's a great use of surplus monies when they come, and we would encourage that.
Super. All right, Janet, thank you.
Oh, welcome. On the next slide, we want to get a little bit more into the structure of the OPEB trust. As you now know, the different employers contribute different amounts to pre-fund. This is different from on the retirement side, where there's no distinction by employers. So on the OPEB trust side, we partition the OPEB trust into something called an agent structure. That way, the contributions that are made for each employer will be designated for that employer's members and the benefits. It's just a more fair way to do that. And this change happened in 2018. And then on the next slide, I'll go into why we now have different investment return assumptions between those agents that are pre-funding and the few agents that are not pre-funding. So on slide 16, we'll see that there are 3 pre-funding agents, as Ted mentioned, LA County, LACERA, and Superior Court. For those agents, we provide the long-term investment rate of return based on how the OPEB trust allocation is determined. It was 6%, and next month we'll be recommending to the Board of Retirement to raise it to 6.25%. Now, 10% or 10 million of that 23 billion in liabilities as of 2022 is represented by these outside districts. They do not pre-fund through the OPEB trust. So for those agents, we look at the general assets of the county. Currently, that's 2.3%, and we'll be recommending 3.50% to the Board of Retirement. On the next slide, slide 17, I'll go into more detail of how we arrived at the 6.25%. We started with the target allocation that you approved in the April Board of Investments meeting, shown on the left chart. Then we looked at the capital market assumptions for both Makita, Milliman, and the Horizon Survey on a 10-year and 20-year basis. Now, we've projected that half of the actual accrued liability would be paid off in about 15 years. So we arrived at an investment return assumption recommendation of 6.25%. On the next slide, slide 18, I wanted to show the history of the investment return assumptions. You can see in the early phase that the investment return assumptions were the same for pre-funding agents as the outside districts. And up through 2014, it was based on the general assets. Starting in 2014, once there were agents that were pre-funding, we took a blend of the general assets and the OPEB trust investment return. Now, 2018 was kind of a pivotal year because in that year, the structure was switched to an agent structure, and it was determined that enough years had elapsed since 2014 that we could demonstrate that the contributions to the OPEB trust and the interest on those contributions would be adequate to pay for the benefits in the foreseeable future. So based on that conclusion, we were able to have the pre-funding agents' investment return assumption be based on the expected return of the OPEB trust rather than a blend of the OPEB trust and the general assets. So that's why in our earlier graph, when you saw the drop in the actual accrued liability in 2018, it was because of that decision where our investment return assumption for LACERA, Superior Court, and the county was increased to 6%. Now, those outside districts still are using the general assets, and as I mentioned earlier, investment return assumption basis, and as I mentioned earlier, it's not a very large portion of the total liability.
So just to clarify, the driver of the 2023 change is just basically an expectation of returns being slightly higher, particularly on the outside districts, with interest rates being higher, the county general fund's getting a little higher return, and on the pre-funding agents, then it's just a slightly higher expected return based on our analysis of Makita, Horizon, and Milliman's return assumptions, right?
That's right. Thanks for that conclusion, Nick. So that is my last slide, but I love helping explaining the OPEB program, so I welcome any other questions. I would like to give an accolade to Robert Schmidt, who has been kind of the lead actuary on this program since the inception in 2006.
Thank you very much, Nick and Janet. And then just to be clear again, Ted, if you could just reinforce this. So this is purely educational from an oversight perspective as a board. The content that you shared here, we don't have like any responsibility for, right? Like it's just like a nice to know type thing, but we're not asked to vote or contribute or comment or anything of that nature.
That's correct. The way you characterize it is correct. What we've traditionally done is this board is responsible for the pension plan side in terms of the actuarial studies and assumptions, and there's some carryovers that go to the OPEB side, and the Board of Retirement approves all of the OPEB actuarial information.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I was not aware of the way that was divided. I just assumed it was all one big bucket. Okay, got it. Go ahead.
A quick question. Can you go to slide 18? Can you explain, can you give a little bit more background on 18, slide 18, the history?
Sure. Do you want me to just go through it year by year?
Yeah, no, so 2006 is when I'm assuming the OPEB was funded and the assumption was 5%, and then it went down then back up, the assumption of investment return. And it's different for outside district versus the pre-funding agents, if you could.
Sure. So in 2006 through 2014, there was no pre-funding. So in that era, we only looked at the general assets and how those were invested for both the pre-funding agents and the outside districts.
Yeah, so that decrease was driven by decline in interest rates over that period. I think would be the primary driver there.
Yes.
Okay.
And then in 2014 through 2018, in that zone, we were able to blend the investment rate of return blended based on the general assets and the performance of the OPEB trust. And the weighting increased on the OPEB trust as more and more was contributed.
Yeah, and you want to explain blending is based on, you want to explain blending quickly?
The way that we blended it was to look at the portion of the OPEB trust that was attributable to the ADC, the actually determined contribution. That portion was weighted for the OPEB trust expected return. And then the remaining weighting was based on the general assets.
And the outside districts don't benefit from our OPEB trust, right?
They do not, that's correct, because they're not pre-funding, and so they cannot benefit from the larger investment return assumption.
And that's why their assumption keeps on going down.
It goes down based on the performance of the general assets of LA County. And we've seen that the general asset performance is going up in 2023. So for those agents, we are recommending an increase.
Yeah, and that one's gonna move up and down a lot because that's gonna be driven by what, as she said, what the general fund returns, and interest rates are gonna play a pretty high, heavy factor on that, so you could see that. It's up because interest rates are up a little bit, but you could see that going back down too.
Yeah, Trustee Fay.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Sure, thank you. A follow-up to that, obviously there's a lot of benefit of pre-funding using the earning from investment. I wonder if it's a chance that we can convince all other outside district to pre-fund it so they also benefit from the investment. So I can assume that would be easier to manage, right, if all agencies are pre-funded.
So, great question, Trustee Mee. Back in 2013, 14, 15-ish timeframe, we did inform the districts that we were setting up these OPEB trust agreements. They opted not to participate at that time based on their budgeting and their funding. I believe one of the districts does participate in some sort of fund with CalPERS, so they've chosen a different route. So we weren't able to set up the agreements and get them to participate at that time, and I think it's a relatively small base of members and probably a small asset pool as well. So it would probably benefit them more per se than it would benefit us from a financial perspective.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. I think we got it. Let's, there being no further questions, move on. Or did you have something?
I did, but it's not that important.
Okay, yeah. Like I said, it doesn't really kind of relate to us. It's like curiosity, but lunch is approaching. So, okay. All right, so thank you very much, Jackie and Nick, on that. I think we're done.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. So then before we go to executive session and then kind of close out the regular, I think Trustee Me, you had a question about the quarterly performance book. And then I think the only thing I'd like to make sure before you ask at this standpoint is that we've really tried to push performance book conversation into the committee structure. So staff has a full opportunity to prepare and we can go deep versus a general meeting. So is this something that can wait till the related asset class question you have, or?
When are we going to have such a meeting about private equity? It's about private equity.
Who's the private equity chair would be you. So when is the next private equity committee meeting? Chris.
The next performance review would be scheduled for November of this year for just private equity asset class.
I can wait for 6 months, I guess.
Yeah, because you can get in manager selection, all the things we did with the real asset thing today. Okay, super. Thank you, Christopher. All right, so then with that being said, you flip through items for staff review.
Nothing?
Nothing. Items for future agendas.
Nothing.
I had,
Yes, Trustee Green.
I don't know the nomenclature of the Human Resources has got a pilot program they're checking out. I don't know the name of it, but I'd asked.
The training class? Or
No,
Carly?
it was the it was regarding succession planning.
Strategic? Or?
No, succession plan.
I don't, is Mr. Popovich, I don't know the nomenclature of the,
Was that the question that you asked Laura
yeah,
for?
yeah, I don't know the name of it, but if.
Just make sure it gets included at that.
It's in beta, but if it does get established to present the report, that was.
Okay.
Okay.
Or.
That would go to the BOR, I'm assuming.
Educate us on it.
Oh, that's on the BOR side.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, got it. Okay. All right. So will you make sure we tighten that up
Yeah,
to get?
so
that
either the OOC, I'll check with Louis where that's gonna go.
Yeah, we can do an informational for the BOI.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Just to make it, thank you. And then, so if we're good to the order, Trustee Green, then you want to get us started?
Yeah, summer's upon us. Parents, you got your kids out of school, and I think I've already said about staff. I appreciate all the work and the reports that validate that strong work, and we're in the right direction. Happy Pride Month, going into that and getting through the month, and want to recognize that, and that's it. Just happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, Trustee Fay.
My order is all good.
Good. Good. Trustee Reed.
Yeah, I have a few reports. First off, yes, happy Pride Month. Last month was also Asian Heritage Month, which I forgot to recognize, as well as Jewish American Heritage Month as well. And I'm part of the BOR. We had a great retreat, and I think a lot of the BOI members were there as well. I'm looking forward to our retreat in September, right? Staff did a great job on the retreat. I think we all thought we needed more time. I mean, it was a long retreat, but we still wished each session was a little bit longer. And also I went to a impact conference and in Europe, in London, and I found it extremely enlightening. And one of the things I learned there was they really delineate the difference between ESG versus impact. But the more enlightening thing that I recognized there was most of the folks there actually recognize the fact that impact and ESG investing is fairly new. And when there were several questions, and then of course this was an impact conference, so they were all pro impact and pro ESG. But when they were asked questions from the audience, they literally said, yeah, we have no really good measurables. So we can't really measure the results of our investing. And they admitted that, which was very refreshing. And they said they're probably 5 to 10 years out in actually having a standardized measuring tool to really measure the fact that their impact is being impactful, right? And because impact, it depends on how you look at it, what variables, which industry. So they're still trying to sort that out. So, and these are coming from folks who are pro impact investing. And to hear that from them, to say that they are very still infant stage in the industry was very refreshing. And what else was there? Yeah, that's it. And thank you.
Trustee Me.
Sure. Thank you for sharing your experience. And adding to everything already said, I just want to say that staff team and consultant, great job. Drew stepping up, so that John can enjoy a vacation in peace, And then thank you, fellow trustee, for the engaged conversation. Yeah, that's all.
Okay. And then in terms of good of the order, likewise, happy Pride Month, and really appreciated in my 4 years here the opportunity to serve with Joe Kelly, who was always making sure we were staying on point as it related to the opportunities and things that we were doing in terms of that community. And then I'd be remiss that I'm married to an American Filipina, and today is the Philippines Independence Day. For those who that celebrate Filipino heritage. And then thank you to the staff for the preparations today. I know we're still evolving the both the materials and the level of preparation that the board brings to those asset class committee focused things. So I really appreciate Jim and the team today for the presentation that you guys did in that particular area. Again, just to, I did it in the Real Assets Committee meeting, but for those of you that maybe weren't there, we have filled a long vacant position in our real estate asset group in our senior PIO, and Terry is in the audience, brand new. I'm not even sure if the cellophane's off technically, but is here. So we look forward to her contributions and leadership here in the future. Somebody else that I wanted to acknowledge in that period. Escapes me in the second, but in that end. But also wanted to, for both, for Jude especially stepping in, for John. I know those are often big shoes to fill, even though they're probably only a size 8. So, 9 in there today on the investment side. And with that being said, we will head into executive session. Jude, did you need something? Okay, yeah.
Just want to mention one thing. When John was not going to be here, they are big shoes to fill. But the one thing I was most excited about is that gave me the privilege of announcing a new team member.
Oh,
so
good.
I think,
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure. Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
So one of the greatest things I think that I get to work on is helping us fill positions. So one of the things I spend a lot of energy in is trying to build a culture, build a team. I think we do have one of the best investment staffs. I've worked for 3 public funds, and I'll put us up there with any of them. So I just want everybody to join me in welcoming Terry Harriman. She's joining as a senior investment officer for real estate in the real assets division. So Terry joins us with a career in real estate that includes experience at real estate management firms, including Greystar, Angelo Gordon, and Barings. She's also worked for the investment advisor Townsend, and she's also been on the other side of the table working at New York Teachers, where she also has experience not only on the investment side, but also the legal And Terry holds a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Planning, but also has a law degree from Brooklyn Law School. So Terry, I know we've known this for a few months, but I'm glad that you're finally aboard and want everybody to welcome her. So.
Just one last thing, is it Father's Day this Sunday?
Oh, yeah.
Happy
Yeah,
Father's Day.
To all the big papas out there, particularly the girl dads. That's hard work. That's hard work, just let that be said. All right, so let's take a break and come back for the closed session here at 10 till 12.